Hello everyone, and welcome to Cleared to Land. On this episode, we're going to explore in detail how British Airways Flight 38 lost the thrust in both engines just 2 miles from Heathrow, and how all 152 people on board still walked away. A few millimeters of metal grounded a Boeing 777. Not a bomb, not an engine coming apart. A few millimeters and a little water that should not have mattered. Speedbird 38 was 2 miles from the runway at Heathrow on a perfectly ordinary approach from Beijing when both engines quietly stopped doing what they were told. They did not fail. They did not catch fire. They simply would not make the thrust the crew was asking for, and there was no time and no height left to work out why. 152 people were on board. Every one of them walked away from an airplane sitting in the grass short of the runway in the biggest airport in Europe. British Airways Flight 38 was a long haul from Beijing to London, a Boeing 777, registration Golf Yankee Mike on the call sign Speedbird 38. Under the wings were 2 Rolls-Royce Trent engines. The airplane was 7 years old and completely unremarkable. There were 3 pilots aboard: Captain Peter Burkill in command, Senior First Officer John Coward, who would fly the approach and landing, and a 3rd pilot carried to give the others rest on the long sectors. 136 passengers and 16 crew, 152 people in all. The route home ran across Mongolia, Siberia, and Scandinavia, some of the coldest air in the world. For most of the cruise, the airplane sat between 34 and 40,000 feet, in outside temperatures around -45. The crew watched the fuel temperature on their displays, the way every long-haul crew does. The coldest it read all flight was -34 degrees. That is cold, but it is not unusual, and it is nowhere near cold enough to freeze jet fuel. No warning ever came on. Nothing about the flight looked wrong. Over London, they held for a few minutes at Lambourne, came down the approach, and were vectored onto the instrument landing system for runway 27 left. At 1,000 feet, the airplane was fully configured to land, gear down, flaps set, on the glide path, on speed. 83 seconds from touchdown, everything was normal. Then the first officer's approach became the most closely studied 90 seconds in the history of the airplane. At about 720 feet, 57 seconds before touchdown, the auto throttle asked both engines for a little more power. It always does on an approach. Small corrections to hold the glide path. The engines answered. And then, 3 seconds later, the right engine stopped answering. Its thrust rolled back to almost nothing and stayed there. 7 seconds after that, the left engine did the same. Neither engine shut down. Both kept running. Both kept producing some thrust, just far less than the crew was asking for, and no more than that no matter what they did. 48 seconds from the ground, the first officer watched the 2 thrust levers begin to split apart on the console, the automatic system shoving them forward, chasing power that would not come. At 430 feet, the captain called the approach stable. The first officer answered with a single word: just. 7 seconds later, the airspeed began to fall below the approach speed. The crew realized the engines were sitting near idle and would not respond. They pushed the thrust levers fully forward by hand. Nothing. The airplane was slowing down, sinking below the glide path, 1.5 miles from a runway it could no longer reach. To understand what was happening, you have to go back several hours and look at something almost too small to see. Jet fuel is never perfectly dry. It always carries a trace of water, a little dissolved in the fuel, a little suspended as tiny droplets. In normal operation, that water is harmless. But this airplane had spent 10 hours cold soaking over Siberia. and in that time the water came out of the fuel as microscopic crystals of soft ice. Not a solid plug, more like a slush, so fine you would never see it. At the low fuel flows of a long cruise, that soft ice did something the industry did not know it could do. It stuck to the inside of the fuel pipes, in a narrow band of temperature the investigators would come to call the sticky range. And there it sat, harmlessly, for hours, a coating of frost building up on the inner walls of the plumbing, waiting. It waited until the worst possible moment. On short final, when the auto throttle demanded that sudden increase in fuel flow, the surge of fuel tore all of that accreted ice loose at once and swept it downstream. And a few inches downstream, in each engine, it arrived at a component called the FOHE, the fuel oil heat exchanger. The heat exchanger is a radiator. It uses hot engine oil to warm the cold fuel before it burns. About 1,000 narrow tubes running through a bath of oil. The fuel enters through the flat face of that bundle of tubes, and that inlet face is where the slush of ice arrived all at once and packed itself across the openings and choked the flow. On both engines, seconds apart, the fuel the crew was demanding simply could not get through. Here is the detail that would rewrite a rule. That heat exchanger had passed every certification test it was ever required to pass. But its inlet tubes were built to stand a few millimeters proud of the heated end plate, just enough that ice landing on the tube mouths sat away from the heat and would not melt. A few millimeters of geometry that no test had ever thought to challenge. Inside the cockpit, none of that was knowable. What the crew had was an airplane running out of speed and height at the same time, with two engines that would not answer. As the airspeed reached 115 knots, the low-speed warning sounded. The captain reached for the one lever he still controlled, drag. He retracted the flaps one step from 30 to 25, trading a little lift for a little less drag, to stretch the glide those last few hundred yards toward the airfield. It is a decision measured in seconds and in feet, and it is the reason the story ends where it does. The airspeed kept falling. At 200 feet, it was down to 108 knots. 10 seconds before touchdown, the stick shaker fired, the airplane warning it was about to stall, and the first officer pushed the nose down to keep flying. In the last seconds, the captain tried to start the auxiliary power unit, and then, realizing a crash was now certain, transmitted a single mayday call. The airplane came down in the grass short of runway 27 left, about 330 meters short of the paved surface, 110 meters inside the airport fence. The nose gear collapsed backwards. The right main gear tore clean off, punched up through the wing, ruptured a fuel tank and the passenger oxygen system. Nearly 7 tons of fuel poured out onto the grass. Nothing ignited. 13 cabin crew ran a full evacuation down the slides. Within minutes, everyone was off. 152 people had been on that airplane. The most serious injury among them was one broken leg. The airplane was destroyed. The first Boeing 777 ever written off. And the investigation that followed, by Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, had a genuine mystery to solve, because on the face of it, nothing was wrong. The fuel was normal. The engines were undamaged. Every part had passed every test. It took 2 years and an enormous amount of testing to prove what had happened. The board rebuilt the fuel system on a test rig, ran fuel through it at the temperatures and flows of the accident flight, and watched soft ice accrete on the pipe walls and then shed, on demand, and choke a heat exchanger. Their conclusion is worth reading in the board's own words. The accreted ice released, causing a restriction to the engine fuel flow at the face of the heat exchanger on both engines. The ice had formed from water that occurred naturally in the fuel. And this is the sentence that mattered. The heat exchanger, although compliant with the applicable certification requirements, was susceptible to restriction. The certification requirements did not take account of this phenomenon, as the risk was unrecognized at that time. In plain terms, the part met the rules, and the rules were wrong. Nobody had imagined that soft ice could build up quietly in a fuel system and then let go all at once and block the exchanger. So no test had ever asked whether it could. And then, while the investigation was still running, it happened again. On the 26th of November, 2008, 10 months after Heathrow, a Delta Airlines 777 with the same type of Rolls-Royce engines was crossing from Shanghai to Atlanta. In cruise, at 39,000 feet, the right engine rolled back on its own. Fuel flow choked to a fraction of what was demanded. It stayed rolled back for 23 minutes. What saved that flight was altitude. The crew descended into warmer air, the ice cleared, and the engine recovered. Same engine, same mechanism, same heat exchanger, but this time, 7 miles up, with room to spare. That second event was the proof. It pushed America's National Transportation Safety Board to issue an urgent recommendation in March 2009 to redesign the heat exchanger. Rolls-Royce did exactly that. The fix was almost absurdly small. They took the inlet face of the heat exchanger and made the tube ends flush with the heated plate and removed the little crimps at the mouth of each tube, the few millimeters that had held the ice away from the heat. Nothing else about the engine changed. The redesigned unit was tested against soft ice down to at least minus 44 degrees, and it held. Then the regulators made it law. The European Authority mandated the modification across the Trent 800 fleet to be fitted by the 1st of January 2011, and the American directive, Airworthiness Directive 2010-07-01, went further, requiring the redesigned heat exchanger across 3 whole families of Rolls-Royce engines, the Trent 500, 700, and 800. Not just the airplanes like Speedbird 38, every airplane that carried the same blind spot, because that was the deeper recommendation the board made. Not only fix this part, review the certification rules themselves, so that fuel systems have to prove they can survive ice building up and letting go. And check every other engine and airframe combination in the sky, because nobody knew how many others shared the same few millimeters of unexamined geometry. A trace of water in clean fuel, 10 hours of cold, a coating of soft ice on the inside of a pipe released at the one moment it could do the most harm, and a few millimeters at the mouth of a tube that no test had ever questioned. Speedbird 38 put 152 people down in the grass, short of the runway, and every one of them walked away. What the airplane left behind was a corrected drawing, a heat exchanger reshaped by a fraction of an inch, and mandated onto 3 families of engines around the world, so that the next airplane cold-soaked over Siberia would not arrive at the runway with nothing to give. Everyone walked away. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. If you'd like to support the channel, please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.